Hello, everyone. Happy Monday. It's the end of June, which is so crazy. It feels like we just started June, like 5 minutes ago. And now we're almost to July. Um, this Friday is the 4th, which is really exciting. Gonna be lots of fireworks in the neighborhood. Fun times. Um, so much happening, so much going on. I have a ton of news stories. So let's get through the housekeeping quickly. There will be no newsletter this Saturday. The regular Saturday newsletter will not come up because it's the long weekend. No one's reading anything this weekend. Everyone's drinking, partying, blah blah blah. No one is so there's be no newsletter on Saturday. We will have News Hour next Monday though. If you have not joined Cameron Journal Plus for that newsletter, that's not coming out on Saturday this week, but did come out last Saturday, head over to CameronJournal.com/subscribe. If you just want to sign up for the newsletter, CameronJournal.com/newsletter. One of the things that I'm really trying to do right now with everybody is really build up some community. So if you want to join the Discord, head over to CameronJournal.com and it's right on the front page at the top. Please make sure if you want to come hang out with us and talk news and what's the latest on the Cameron Journal and all that type of thing, please come and hang out with us. I'd really enjoy that. One of the things that I've never really had as a brand is a lot of community of people around me. Hasn't really been a thing. But we're trying to build that more. So do come and hang out for that. It would be a lot of fun and it would be really great to get to know and talk to some more people and really galvanize a nice group of people around the Cameron Journal. We have a lot of new content coming out. I just did a whole weekend of uploading new interviews. Today's interview is a very heavy hitter. Michael Soussaint was the whistleblower for the UNO for Food program, which was how Iraq traded its oil with Europe before the invasion in 2003. We were chatting with him this week about Trump, geopolitics, all this type of thing. That interview is live on YouTube, Facebook, Rumble, Daily Motion, places like that right now. It's a really, really great conversation. If you haven't seen it, you definitely should. This Wednesday, we're going to do another edition of the Living Joke Podcast. Last week, we piloted the Living Joke Podcast with my two buddies. We liked doing it. You liked it too. So we're going to keep doing it. And we're going to be doing every Wednesday. We're going to be a little variant of time this week, so check your social media sites for the schedule. But we are going to be doing that on a regular basis. We are going to start a Substack, get some graphics going, fun stuff like that. But we had a lot of fun. We're going to keep doing it. I know this week we're going to have to be talking cars. Connor has bought a new car recently. Bo and I are both looking to buy cars. So, that's I know we're at least talking about that. We're going to talk about some other stuff. A lot is going on in the world. A lot is happening. We have lots to talk about, so I'm not going to waste any more time. Let's dive into the headlines. Let me do this. And let me do this. Yeah, these are all the new all the new videos. So I wanted to kind of do a quick update on the Iran strikes that happened last week. There's been a lot of back and forth on how effective the nuclear strikes were. So this is a little out of date because it came from the 24th. And it said that a preliminary classified U.S. report says the American bombing of 3 nuclear sites in Iran set the country's nuclear program back only a few months, according to officials familiar with the findings. The strike sealed off the entrances to 2 of the facilities but did not collapse their underground buildings, the officials said in the early findings concluded. Before the attack, U.S. intelligence agencies had said that if Iran tried to rush making a bomb, it would take about 3 months. After the U.S. bombing run and days of attacks by the Israeli Air Force, the report by the Defense Intelligence Agency estimated that the program had been delayed, but by less than 6 months. I do believe there's been a brief update. Yes. Yeah, so this is a little bit more up to date. A leaked U.S. said that in a few months, CIA Director John Ratcliffe also on Wednesday the strikes had severely damaged Iran's nuclear program. Rafael Grossi, the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, said on Thursday that centrifuges at the deeply buried Fordo uranium enrichment plant are, quote, no longer operational, but that it would be too much to assert that Iran's nuclear program had been wiped out. I also had, which matches also up with what the IAEA report had said, there's been a lot of bluster by Republican politicians on this subject, including Pete Hegseth, who, was like, no, it's all been, completely destroyed and all this type of thing. And it appears that it has been at least pretty damaged. Wiped out is probably a little beyond. But they'll be cleaning for quite some time. So we can see here bomb entry hole, debris, likely bomb entry hole, entrance tunnel filled with dirt, entrance tunnels filled with dirt. The support building appears intact, but they weren't targeting it. Entrance tunnel filled with dirt. So there's this idea that kind of under this mountain, damage is not too good. And this is the Fordo nuclear facility, kind of the one that is most well known, and had the advanced centrifuges to enrich uranium, which could be used in a nuclear weapon. And then Natanz, there's some new damage, likely bomb entry point, gray dust, new damage, had been destroyed in different things. It was a more above ground facility, but this portion was underground. And then at Isfahan, this is all damaged by Israel, entrance tunnels filled in, and some bombing runs there. So there's still some debate over, how much of it had been destroyed, if nuclear material had been moved, what exactly had happened, and how effective these strikes were. But I just want to update everybody because there'd been some debate about that, and Hegseth had talked about it a little bit, and so I thought it was, important to, kind of follow up a little bit. Too oftentimes, I've been on the phone all day. I had a recording earlier, so voice is already on its way out. There has been a lot of debate around what has and has not been damaged, and so it looks like the bombings were fairly effective. They did get in there. They did do some damage. Far from a complete collapse, or far under far from it being over forever. But the reality is they'll be digging out and excavating this stuff for a long time, and the longer it takes them to get in there, the worse, things could get. Structurally, things could be very poor, so that the facilities can't really be safely used. It says that Mr. Grossi of the UN Nuclear Watchdog said that given the power the bombs dropped on Fordo, we already know that these centrifuges are no longer operational. The spinning machinery of high-speed centrifuges require a high degree of precision and are vulnerable to intense vibrations. The International Atomic Energy Agency said it had identified direct impacts on the underground enrichment halls at Natanz after Israel targeted the facility with missiles. It also said the attack had destroyed the above-ground part of the fuel enrichment plant. Unlike in Fordo, Natanz's facilities were buried only a few meters deep. Satellite images from June 22nd show 2 craters over the suspected location of those facilities. And then it says a U.S. Navy submarine fired more than 24 cruise missiles at a third site in Isfahan, which had also been attacked by the Israeli military. The site was thought to house enriched uranium, along with facilities to process uranium ore and turn uranium gas into a solid form, potentially be used as a weapon. It said that reported that one of Israel's attacks in Isfahan had hit the enriched uranium metal processing facility, which was under construction, and then report something from Marco Rubio. There was some sort of secret site. They don't know where the Iran stockpile of near bomb-grade uranium is and what may come of it. Mr. Grossi told the Times by text that the fuel had last been seen by his teams of UN inspectors about a week before Israel began its attacks on Iran. The fuel is stored in special casks small enough to fit in the trunks of about 10 cars. So, how effective this is or is not kind of remains to be seen. Damage has definitely been done. I wouldn't say that it's the end of the Iranian nuclear program. If anything, they're probably going to double down. And my guess, if there's any facility they're going to fix first, it's Fordo. Because it's the strongest one. And the one that was most resistant to the attack. So, that's an update on that. Speaking of Iran, I love Brian Allen. He's great. And he reported over the weekend that Iran's Grand Ayatollah just issued a fatwa calling for Trump and Netanyahu to be treated as enemies of God and not in the metaphorical sense. A fatwa is a legal ruling by a senior Islamic cleric, and when the Grand Ayatollah speaks, millions across the Shia world listen. This isn't a rogue militia leader. This is a religious authority whose edicts can justify action, spiritual, political, and military. This fatwa did not call them political adversaries. It labeled Trump and Netanyahu as enemies of God. That's language reserved for those seen as existential threats to faith itself, not just foreign policy. This just went nuclear, theologically. Now zoom out. Trump authorized U.S. strikes on Iran's nuclear sites. Netanyahu's on trial back home while pushing war. Both leaders are facing backlash, not just politically, but spiritually. The Ayatollah's move reframes this as a holy war. And here's where it gets dangerous. Religious decrees like this often transcend borders. We've seen this before, with fatwas sparking lone wolf violence, political unrest, or regional insurgency. The phrase enemy of God is not idle rhetoric. The fatwa might not change Pentagon policy, but it changes the psychological battlefield. It energizes militias, radicalizes narratives, and flips the moral compass for millions who now view this conflict as sacred, not strategic. And then the first comment, oh, that's not there anymore. There was a great comment that said every president since Jimmy Carter's had a fatwa against them, which is true. But that is definitely, I mean, how this works out remains to be seen. What's going to happen remains to be seen. There's still rumors floating around OSINT circles that it's regime change time. I don't know how they're going to accomplish that with bunker buster bombs, but we'll see how things develop. But yes, the Ayatollah's response so far has been shooting up a military base that they called ahead about and issuing paperwork. That's what we have so far. So before we get into the big beautiful bill, one of the things that I always have talked about and written about quite extensively is capitalism. For longtime readers and listeners will know. And this past Saturday, I was writing the newsletter about the win of Zohran Mamdani for the New York Democratic mayoral primary, beating out Andrew Cuomo, who outspent him and all this sort of thing. And I was writing about socialism and capitalism and why our attitudes have changed and how the older generation thinks of socialism as Cuba, but the younger generation thinks of it as Norway, and why younger people are so responsive to socialism and why they're so responsive to the Mamdani campaign. Now, I love Aaron Slodov. He's building the future of robotics at Atomic Robotics. Would love to meet him. I've recently been in touch with him a little bit. This memo from Peter Thiel, of all people, 5 years ago to Mark Zuckerberg, Nick Clegg, Antonio Lucio, Sheryl Sandberg, and Mark Andreessen, kind of remarks why a lot of people, especially millennials and younger, are in favor of socialism. And it says here, Nick, I certainly would not suggest that our policy should be to embrace millennial attitudes unreflexively. I would be the last person to advocate for socialism. But when 70% of millennials say they're pro-socialist, we need to do better than simply dismiss them by saying they're stupid or entitled or brainwashed. We should try and understand why. And from the perspective of a broken generational compact, there seems to be a pretty straightforward answer to me. Namely, that when one has too much student debt, or if housing is too unaffordable, then one will have negative capital for a long time, and or find too much student debt or housing is too affordable, then one will have negative capital for a long time, and or find it very hard to start accumulating capital in the form of real estate. And if one has no stake in the capitalist system, then one may well turn against it. And someone points out why so many rich people voted for Mamdani. But that really, especially as we're preparing for America's Lost Generation and talking about that broken generational contract, this is so prescient. The reality is, when all the wealth is owned by wealthy people, and that money is not moving into the system, and is not, getting towards younger people through wages, through labor, through property, all this type of thing, you end up in a situation where it's easier, better to work together to have the government do more, to raise taxes on those that have, so that everyone else can live a good and decent life. And I think this idea of one will have negative capital for a long time, and I find it very hard to start accumulating capital in the form of real estate. And if one has no stake in the capitalist system, then one may well turn against it. I think has definitely galvanized younger people against the capitalist system. And it was certainly the beginning of my own, I wouldn't say reaction to the capitalist system, but is definitely a big part of my own kind of beginnings of liberalism. I think people have kind of forgotten. My staff will not leave me alone, and we're in the middle of a dozen million projects. I need to remind them I'm busy on Monday nights. That was the beginning of my liberalism. As long as people know, I got involved in Occupy Wall Street in Denver, Occupy Denver, and I found out all the ways in which the capitalist system was not working for people. Things I didn't really know or understand. I knew it wasn't working for me, but I thought it was me. And then I quickly figured out, oh no, it's actually kind of way more than that. It actually is, a number of things, but especially this, broken generational compact was the big part. And that was when I started to question capitalism, economics, what happened in 2008. That is the reason why I'm sitting here doing this show and why you're watching it. And in America's Lost Generation, I really go through that. I really talk about, here's what happened, and here's why things are the way they are. The only kind of difficult part is, I don't think we can fix it. But I think much like in the early 20th century, where coming out of the Gilded Age, you'd had this huge concentration of wealth in the hands of the few. In the 20s, you had a big labor movement, and you had socialist movements. There's actually, read a book called American Midnight, and it talked about how kind of precarious things were in the early 1920s, and kind of how, difficult, how kind of a big of a threat communism was coming out of a newly Bolshevik Russia, and how the labor movement, these socialist movements really started to gain steam in the 1920s and really took off in the 1930s, which gets into Upton Sinclair and his run for the governor of California. And it's very interesting sort of thing. I think we're kind of living through that same time where you've had mass concentration of wealth in the hands of a few. And then now people are kind of like, well, you know what? We want good lives too. And we will find a way to do that by hook or by crook. And And that's, I think, has led to people saying they have no stake in the capitalist system. Why keep it, sort of thing. That then kind of leads to this little rant. And I mean, honestly, this person can go kind of get stuffed, but, when we talk about moving towards socialism, that doesn't necessarily mean we're not going to have capitalist elements. And that kind of illustrates the thing is people automatically assume, okay, we're going to abolish capitalism, we're going to move to socialism, and then that's going to be, no private, property of any kind, no farms, all this type of thing. I mean, like, the Soviet Union didn't really achieve that. Neither has China. So I don't think that's the direction we're going in. I think most people want, again, Northern Europe. They would like the Scandinavian type of socialism, not necessarily Soviet socialism. And so she goes, abolish capitalism, cool, who grows the food? No, seriously, who's out there at dawn breaking their back in the dirt, fixing broken irrigation lines, replacing a tractor axle in 110-degree heat for free, because you think profit is mean? Who mines the lithium for your laptop, the cobalt for your EV battery, the iron for your train rails? Who refines it? Who ships it? Who builds the ships? Who insures them when they catch fire in the middle of the ocean? Who unloads the containers at the port? Who drives the truck across 4 states? Who services the diesel engine at the roadside stop in Nebraska when it breaks at 3 a.m.? Who keeps track of inventory, repairs the refrigeration system, updates the software, cleans the floors, builds the shelves, trains the workers, manages the risk, pays the legal fees, replaces the light bulbs, handles the theft, the overtime, the breakdowns, and the lawsuits? Who coordinates all of this across time zones and continents without profit? You think the whole supply chain is just going to keep running because everyone suddenly caught a case of the warm fuzzies? You think people are going to wake up and go do hard, thankless physical labor for vibes? Capitalism doesn't work because people are good. It works because people are selfish, and it figured out how to harness that into infrastructure. Not true. It's the only system that survives human nature without needing to rewrite it. Also not true. You kill profit, you kill production, you kill production, you kill logistics. You kill logistics, and suddenly it's a day 4 of your anti-capitalist utopia, and the shelves are empty, the power is out, the pharmacy is closed, and nobody knows how to fix a fucking thing. Anti-capitalism isn't a philosophy, it's a death wish dressed up as a virtue signal. It's the aesthetic rebellion powered by an iPhone, subsidized by Uber Eats, and resting on 400 years of industrial infrastructure you take for granted because you never built a single useful thing in your life. You're not oppressed, you're just ungrateful. And the second you get your little no-profit revolution, you'll find out exactly how long society runs on vibes. About 3 days, give or take. Then the generators fail and you're boiling rainwater so you can heat up your shitty powdered food. A lot of this stuff is low-hanging fruit criticism of capitalism. I don't have time to get into every single issue here, but the reality is, who actually does this now? Not capital, running inventory. Workers do this. Actual people do this. And they do it for a wage. Unhappily or happily so, doesn't matter, but they do it for a wage. If the value produced by those workers goes back to the workers and not to the interests of capital, who's also undermining their government, then that's a very different conversation than having all the extra value, the labor value, returned to shareholders in the form of capital. That's the difference here. You can still have industrial capitalism. You can still organize resources and all this type of thing. You do not need a single individual or a single investors or all this time to do that necessarily. There are other ways to form capital to create these companies. There are other ways for these companies to be owned. They can be owned for the public good. There's actually a corporation type for that now. They can also be owned by workers to benefit the workers who are also the shareholders. I mean, imagine if signing on to a company, if you're starting a company and everyone is putting in, their capital in terms of labor, or an investor decides to invest in a worker-owned business for a defined return over time. Workers could organize those things. People could organize those things because the people are doing it now. What really broke capitalism was industrialization. Industrialization separated the worker from the value of their labor. When capitalism was a city where everyone owned their own means of production and people owned their own business and their own labor, and the benefit of that labor went back to them, capitalism actually can work very well. The problem is shortly after we figured out how to do that, the Industrial Revolution came along, and all of a sudden you needed huge amounts of money together to buy new, faster machines, all this type of thing, and that's what the wealthy did. That's what the aristocracy did. So all of a sudden, you've changed the relationship people have to their work and to labor, is rather than you getting the full value of what you make and do, you now get some of that back in terms of wage, and the rest goes to the owner and investors and shareholders. And people forget about this, but Adam Smith actually addresses this. Adam Smith did not like wage labor. He thought wage labor should be done only for the purposes of forming your own capital to start your own business. He also believed that large concentrations of capital did need to be controlled by government. He was not an unfettered laissez-faire. I mean, everyone talks about the free hand of the market. He was not some unfettered laissez-faire capitalist. Actually, far from it. He already saw inherent in the system, in his book, The Wealth of Nations, the issues with capitalism. So, if workers are doing it now, workers can do it later. And they can still have wages. They had wages in the Soviet Union. They weren't much, but they had wages in the Soviet Union. This is low-hanging fruit capitalism criticism. And the only reason I'm addressing this is because as the New York mayoral race goes on, and as you hear more about Mamdani and all this type of thing, because it's becoming a thing, the race has been nationalized, you're going to hear more stuff like this. You're going to hear, more difficult, you're going to hear more stuff like, more criticisms of social democracy, and it's important to have that conversation now. I would invite you to go read my What the Hell is Going On collection at CameronJournal.com. I am working on videos to go with that collection, but those will be up very soon, and so, but I would encourage you to go read 2 essays, How We the People Became We the Corporation, and 1977, The Rise of Discounters and Deregulation. I would read both of those, grok both of those, because that will give you a foundation for capitalism and kind of what went wrong with it. Let's keep moving. Next, we're going to talk about the Big Beautiful Bill, and we're going to start by watching... well, do we want to start with the Senate hearings? Do we want to start with... let's start here, actually. So, Senator Schumer forced a marathon session overnight to have the entire bill read out. And no one showed up for it.
To thank the clerks who stayed up all night.
Of the RECA Extension Act of 2022 and inserting December 31, 2027. There you go.
Mr. President.
I recognize the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I would like to start by just taking a moment to thank the clerks who stayed up all night reading the amendment and getting us to this point. I know it was a long night and that we're not finished yet, but I want them to know that the Senate appreciates their dedication, their stamina, and their service. In just a moment, I'm going to make a point of order against the substitute amendment that I offered.
And so, yeah, they stayed up for 16 hours, and there's a lot in the Big Beautiful Bill. I have a series of things we're going to get into it, but we're going to start here with Brian Allen, because you know how much I love his reporting. And I love his line that they're trying to rewrite the economy in ink, but can't even stay awake for the fine print. And there's, it's 900 pages long. There's a lot of rushed power grabs, no sunlight, and no scrutiny. They'll call it a fiscal bill, but it's an economic wrecking ball. Cuts to Medicaid, we'll talk more about that in a minute. Ends key ACA subsidies, they finally killed healthcare. Trillions in tax breaks for billionaires, true. And as to the national deficit, $3.3 trillion over the next decade. The cruelty is the point, the math is just a cover. A giant rotting sandwich of policy disasters, and Republicans don't even want to bother to stay for the unboxing. They want to govern in permanent blackout. No hearings, no scrutiny, no dissent. They didn't want America to read this bill. They wanted America to swallow it. The public deserves better than the midnight sabotage. The legislation that affects millions should not be passed in the shadows, especially if not by people too cowardly to sit through their own scam. More to come. And that kind of gets into a couple of the provisions of this bill, and this video clip is prescient. So here we are.
Tips. The president has said, your tips will be 100% yours. Does this tax bill continue the payroll tax on people's tips?
Yes, it does, Mr.
Overtime. The president said your overtime will be tax-free. Does this bill continue the payroll tax on overtime?
It does not exempt overtime from the payroll tax.
The president has said he's going to remove taxes on Social Security. Does this bill remove taxes on Social Security benefits?
The legislation provides an increased exemption amount.
But does it remove taxes on Social Security benefits as promised by the president?
Does not change Social.
The president and the Republicans. Okay, on tips. The president has said your tips will be 100% yours. Does this?
And that is very emblematic of what is going on in this bill. You probably saw a lot of people on social media being like, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. This is a huge handout to the working class. None of it's happening. And it gets worse. It gets so much worse. It is a huge wealth transfer in American history. It does kill they're getting rid of all the solar panel subsidies, so it kills the solar industry. There's a $1 trillion cut to Medicaid over 10 years. Number 4, the nursing home shutting down. I've read a number already. A quarter of nursing homes are going to shut. 1/4 of nursing homes in this country are going to shut because guess how most older people who don't have money pay for their nursing home? Medicaid. 5, there will be energy shortages due to the lack of new solar being put in because we're growing electricity for the first time since the 80s, and with AI and electric cars we need more electricity than ever before, and renewables are here and being actively installed. The reality is when they kill the solar industry, that's going to kill all the new energy capacity. And yes, there's $4.5 trillion in new debt over the next decade. Here's what's even more crazy when we want to talk about taxes. The Senate version of the Big Beautiful Bill calls for a $6,000 senior bonus. It says here, the Senate has unveiled its version of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that includes a temporary enhanced deduction for seniors age 65 and up. The Chamber's version of the proposal brings the deduction to $6,000 per qualifying individual, up from $4,000 per person proposed by the House. Notably, the Senate's calling for a deduction. The senior bonus is in lieu of the elimination of taxes on Social Security, another promise President Trump didn't do. The Republicans' tax bill is being done through reconciliation, a process that generally prohibits changes to Social Security. The White House has said the proposed deduction is a historic tax break for seniors. The full deduction amount would be available to individuals with up to $75,000 in modified adjusted gross income and $150,000 if married and filing jointly. Notably, the Senate version calls for a faster 6% phase-out rate for incomes above those thresholds compared to the House's version of the 4% phase-out rate, according to Alex Durante. The faster phase-out means the full $6,000 benefit is lost more quickly, said Howard Gluckman, senior fellow at the Urban Brookings Tax Policy Center. For people who would be eligible for the full proposed senior deduction, the Senate's $6,000 version is more generous. It really depends on where you are in the income distribution, Gluckman said, with middle-income taxpayers poised to benefit most. In the House version, the proposed senior deduction will be available to taxpayers whether they take the standard deduction or itemize their tax returns. There are not many taxpayers in the income ranges for the deduction who itemize their returns, Gluckman said. And it's just one... I mean, it gets even worse, like with the SALT deduction. They're just, the Senate Finance Committee proposed a no tax on tips measure as part of a multi-trillion-dollar package of tax cuts. Senate Republicans would cap the deduction on tips at $25,000 a year. The House version of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act didn't have a cap. The tax break wouldn't be available to many people. In both versions, the tax break is structured as a deduction available on qualified tips. The Senate legislation defines tips as ones that are paid in cash, charged or received as part of a tip-sharing arrangement. Taxpayers, both employees and independent contractors, would be able to claim it from 2025 to 2028. Filers could take advantage whether they itemize deductions of the tax returns or claim the standard deduction. It also goes on, by comparison, the Senate bill would gradually reduce the value of the tax deduction once individuals' income exceeds $100,000 or $300,000 for married couples. The Senate would dilute the tax break's value by $100 for every $1,000 of income over those thresholds. All in all, we have a piece of legislation that is cutting healthcare, it's cutting scientific funding, It's a lot of cuts throughout government, but the deficit is still there. We're still going to be racking up debt, which everyone says is a huge problem. I don't necessarily think it is, but it's tax breaks to the wealthy, because top-end tax rates are coming down as well, because it also makes permanent Trump's 2017 tax cuts that are set to expire at the end of this year. It's basically more money to the top and less money for everyone else. And if you need health care, there's also Medicaid work requirements. If you're on Medicaid, you're required to work 80 hours a month. Same thing with SNAP food stamp benefits, SNAP EBT. Will now come with more work requirements. This is this playbook from the 90s, by the way. This was the welfare reform of the 90s, and putting in work requirements and basically making it so that fewer people end up using these programs and therefore they cost less. That's the whole point, is to throw people off of these programs so that they cost less. This is going to radically change the American economy. It's going to radically restructure the American economy, and it's going to do so on the backs of the sick and poor people. Quite simply. And for all your trouble, you're not getting tax breaks on Social Security. You're getting a $4,000 to $6,000 tax deduction, depending on which version passes the Senate, and you're still getting a tax on tips and overtime. I'm sorry, where's the help for the working class from the working class president? Oh wait, it isn't here. And if you need food stamps because you're not making enough money, then you better hope that you're working 80 hours a month. If you need health care because your employer doesn't provide it, then I hope that you don't need Medicaid in your state, because all your ACA subsidies are going away, so you won't be able to afford health insurance. And then on top of that, you're also going to have your requirement for Medicaid. It'll throw anywhere from 7 to 14 million people off of Medicaid. They're finally killing Obamacare. They're finally killing the Affordable Care Act, basically just because they're not funding it. That's a big part of this bill as well. There's a lot of DOGE stuff that's getting incorporated as well. This is this is going to be a massive change, and a lot of people are going to be hurt, and some will die from this bill passing and going through. And that's the sad, unfortunate reality of the situation. I don't encourage you necessarily to go and read it, but I would encourage you to keep reading quality reporting on it. I will let you know when it passes and how all that is going to work. But right now, we're going to move on to trade and the global economy. There's a lot going on. So this weekend, Trump announced that he was canceling all trade talks with Canada because Canada was proposing a digital services tax that would cost American technology companies billions. And Canada announced late last night that it will scrap that proposal. It says here, Canada's government announced on Sunday night that it would cancel a tax on American technology companies that led President Trump to suspend trade talks between the two countries, handling an important victory to Mr. Trump. Prime Minister Mark Carney discussed the decision to scrap Canada's digital services tax with Mr. Trump on Sunday. Mr. Carney's office said in a sign that trade talks were resuming. Canada's Finance Minister, François-Philippe Champagne, spoke with the United States Trade Representative Jameson Greer on Sunday, according to Mr. Carney's office. The tax, which had been due to take effect on Monday, became the latest flashpoint in difficult negotiations between the United States and Canada on Friday, when Mr. Trump said the talks were off. On social media, Mr. Trump called the levy a blatant attack and said he would inform Canada within a week about the duties they will be paying to do business with the United States of America. 48 hours later, the Canadian government folded, announcing it would not go ahead with the tax. The finance ministry said the government had decided to rescind the digital services tax in anticipation of a mutually beneficial comprehensive trade arrangement with the United States. Technically, the cancellation of the tax needs to be approved in legislation, so until that time, the government is suspending its collection. Politically, canceling the tax should be a simpler matter for the government. The White House did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Canada's 3% digital services tax has been in place since last year, but the first payments were only due beginning Monday. Because the tax is retroactive, American companies were preparing to turn over roughly $2.7 billion to the Canadian government, according to a trade group for large American tech companies. U.S. officials from both parties have long chafed at taxes like the one Canada has imposed, calling them unfairly targeted at services provided by American companies like Google, Apple, and Amazon. Mr. Carney said the cancellation of the tax would put the talks back on track with the goal of reaching an agreement on July 21st. The Trump administration has imposed a 25% tariff on most goods from Canada, with which it has a free trade agreement, together with Mexico. Like other countries, Canada is also subject to a 50% U.S. tariff on its exports of steel and aluminum. Talks on reaching a new trade deal are particularly crucial for Canada, whose economy is heavily dependent on exports to the United States. Canada is America's second largest trading partner. In our negotiations on a new economic and security relationship between Canada and the United States, Canada's new government will always be guided by the overall contribution of any possible agreement to the best interests of Canadian workers and businesses, Mr. Carney said in a written statement. This is, an odd sort of a thing. I wasn't aware that that Canada had done that. But Trump has quite quashed it, and that is very emblematic of how the global economy is changing. And we're not going to read all. We're going to be able to read all of this because it's behind a paywall. Although I could go find it on Apple News, and I might if we get into it. But this article: the world economy is on the brink of epochal change. Capitalism's operating system is due for a major upgrade. How that turns out depends on enormously consequential political choices. The world economy is like a supercomputer that churns through trillions of calculations of prices and quantities and spits out information on incomes, wealth, profits, and jobs. This is effectively how capitalism works, as a highly efficient information processing system. To do that job like any computer, capitalism runs on both hardware and software. The hardware is the markets, institutions, and regulatory regimes that make up the economy. The software is the governing economic ideas of the day. In essence, what society inside the economy is for. Most of the time, the computer works quite well, but now and then it crashes. Usually when that happens, the world economy just needs a software update, new ideas to address new problems. But sometimes it needs a major hardware modification as well. We're in one of those Control-Alt-Delete moments. Against the background of tariff wars, market angst about U.S. debt, tumbling consumer confidence, and a weakening dollar watched over by a heedless administration, globalization's American-led era of free trade and open societies is coming to a close. The global economy is getting a hardware refit and trying out a new operating system, in effect a full reboot, the likes of which we have not seen in nearly a century. To understand why this is happening and what it means, we need to abandon any illusion that the worldwide turn towards right-wing populism and economic nationalism is merely a temporary error, and that everything will eventually snap back to a relatively benign world of the late 90s and early 2000s. The computer's architecture is changing, but how this next version of capitalism will work depends a great deal on the software we choose to run it on. And this kind of turns back to, let's just go look at the rest of it. I read it over the weekend, and we'll just go find the rest of it. There it is. This kind of goes back to the conversation we were just having about Mamdani and the socialism and competing with capitalism and how systems don't necessarily work. And I love that it mentions right-wing populism and economic nationalism, because that we're not the only country suffering from this right now. It's why Britain left the EU. It's why Hungary has a tenuous relationship with the EU right now. It's why a lot of Eastern Europe is, going its own. There's a lot changing. And this, I think, article analyzes things quite well. I've long wanted to finish an article about saying forget the 70s, we actually have the economy of the late 1940s, and I love this line. It says, despite the state interventions of Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal program, the economic situation stabilized and returned to sustained growth only in the 40s, when wartime rearmament delivered a huge industrial stimulus. The computer built for the post-war period was solving to avoid a repeat of the 1930s. The software update was a new governing idea of full employment. Achieving that aim as the central raison d'etre of the economy also entailed several hardware modifications. One was a policy forcing wealth owners to use their capital locally by limiting their ability to move it out of the country. To maintain their profits, they were obliged to invest in technology that would increase productivity. In this virtuous cycle, the high productivity allowed for high wages, which the state could then tax to fund social transfers. Combined with the government spending power revenues raised by high marginal taxes, America's welfare state was born. Labor unions were seen more as partners in business enterprises, and political parties needed to appeal to the median middle-income voter. These changes produced a political system in which the two main parties competed over a centrist consensus so bipartisan that people struggled to see the differences between Democrats and Republicans. And then it goes into the 70s and right-to-work states and getting rid of unions, and the Federal Reserve raised interest rates to 20% to squeeze inflation, and a measure that induced a harsh recession, and we got stagflation in the late 70s. As all of that implies, full employment ceased to be the governing economic idea. The software rewrite of this era instead made price stability, capital mobility, and the restoration of profits via globalization the new priorities. The hardware modification was to make central banks more independent, the better to enforce price stability and enable the recovery of profits. These new priorities were justified by Margaret Thatcher's famous nostrum that, quote, there is no alternative. This reboot has come to be known as neoliberalism. And then he gets into how America was doing in the 90s, and so we see, then this is kind of the important bit. So we seem to be stuck, which is why this moment is so perplexing. The system upgrade is pending. The right is offering its regressive modernization as the update. The left has yet to figure out which of these three paths it wants to take. One possibility is to stay put with the gerontocracy of the Democratic Party and wait for Trumpism to implode. That might happen, and the Democrats' current position as the party of the institutional status quo makes this the most likely path. But this will be a losing proposition if no reversion to the mean of the pre-MAGA American politics occurs. The effort by Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Bernie Sanders to rally an anti-oligarchy movement advocates for a second option, of left-wing populism. But whether this appeals to young men who've been drawn to Trump, as well as young women who poll as more progressive and can create a broad enough coalition remains to be seen. A third approach is the abundance agenda, promoted recently by Ezra Klein and The Atlantic's Derek Thompson, which proposes a progressive political program based on lower regulation, pro-growth policies as a spark for renewed economic growth, though critics on the left accuse this approach of failing to confront corporate power. To develop an alternative to the progressive modernization underpinning Trump's re-election, the left must come up with a governing economic idea that can compete. Technocratic fixes of the old system look very unlikely to inspire a broad enough coalition to defeat the potent, if unstable, electoral alliance that re-elected Donald Trump. The most promising avenue, one that could adjust the needs of millions of Americans who feel shut out of growth and prosperity and alienated from America's governing elite, might be a fusion of the AOC Bernie populism with a more political, less technocratic version of abundance. Regardless of whether such a project can materialize, we have to accept that a transformation is underway. A new economic order is forming, which means that it's not yet fixed and can still be shaped. But time is running out. As jumbled as the regressive modernization is, it could win the day if we do not come up with a different governing idea of what the economy is and whom it is for. And we need enough people in our democracy to agree that this new purpose is the right one. The ideas are there to be found. They just need politicians with the courage to try them. I am not so enthusiastic about that. I think a lot of left-wing populism is not always successful. See Argentina and Peronism. I mean, yes, obviously the world economy is changing and the old globalization is probably not coming back. I don't think we're going back to a pre-Trump world either. I worry that we're going to get some weird Franken version where because Trump is doing tariffs, he's not doing capital controls. So we might end up with some really regressive sort of economic nationalism with globalism. Like free globalism, free economic, sort of free movement of capital around the planet with lots of tariffs and trade barriers that makes it kind of ineffective. So that we're still having, money moving out of the country, but it's not benefiting people. We're also undercutting social programs so that people just suffer more. I mean, I think that's kind of where it's all going, is rather than trying to help the most people, we're actually trying to help the fewest people. And I think, and it's funny because I think there are some people who are kind of already seeing this, in terms of understanding, how people are kind of already suffering, who's being economically left behind. That even kind of loops back into why millennials are looking for socialism, is you're having a lot of people left behind, and then you pile onto this entire conversation that changes with AI and robotics that are coming. And the robotics changes are already here. The AI changes are already here. You pile on all of these things, and it's like, who's this economy working for? Who is benefiting? The wealthy asset owners, which honestly, Thomas Piketty, in Capitalism, 15 years ago, said, in the 21st century, wealth derived from capital will be more valuable than wealth derived from labor. And we're now kind of finally seeing how that system is going to work. Basically, if you do not own assets, you do not have money, you will end up being poor. That gets us into techno-feudalism. We're basically regressing to how life was for the majority of human history. All the gains in creating a middle class from trade during the Renaissance and through industrialization in the 19th century, we could be losing. Don't know that for sure yet, but it's not looking great. Let's move on. Kind of, piling on top of this global idea, I really loved this thing from Project Syndicate. And it said, this thing's, I think, a bit long. Well, I'll grab you the big bits. Donald Trump's second-term policies have already been detrimental to America's economy and national security. While his administration has delivered a massive gift to China, there's still a chance for Europeans and others mourning the loss of U.S. global leadership to pick up the pieces. And it says here, Trump wants to reverse the loss of American power, and he has made his tariffs his tool of choice for advancing his economic and national security goals. He's deploying a variety of other traditionally protectionist tools, such as export controls, direct controls on imports, deemed national security threats, and restrictions on inbound and outbound foreign direct investment. But these policies are being implemented in a scattershot, on-again, off-again way, and their objectives are often unclear and contradictory. Trump's approach has always been based on his zero-sum mercantilist view that exports are good, imports are bad. He sees America's bilateral trade deficits as a sign of weakness, and this often leads to ludicrous conclusions, like the notion that a poor country exporting essential raw materials to the U.S. ought to import an equivalent value of goods from American producers. He believes that the unfair practices of trading partners are the primary cause of the U.S. trade deficit. They are not. Adding to the absurdity, the Trump administration's calculus is based only on trading goods, though the U.S. has large and growing trade surpluses in services, which account for 30% of global trade. These were conveniently left out. Perhaps Trump's own career led him to believe that real estate or banking services do not produce economic value, but they clearly do. Just look at the value created by Amazon Web Services, Google Search, ChatGPT, and other U.S. digital businesses that dominate global markets. Trump contends that tariffs will boost manufacturing, production, and employment in the U.S. He is mistaken. In the short run, tariffs and imports of intermediate inputs will increase the costs and prices of U.S. manufactured goods, reducing both domestic and foreign demand for them. In the long run, tariffs will not reverse the secular declines in manufacturing production as a share of GDP and manufacturing employment, both overall and as a share of total employment, that have occurred gradually but steadily for decades in all advanced economies. This is even true in Germany, which has significant manufacturing trade surplus. Several structural forces, including rapid productivity growth, automation, increasing competition, and a shift in demand away from goods to services, account for these secular trends. Moreover, neither Trump's across-the-board nor his reciprocal bilateral trade tariffs distinguish among industries, again leading to contradictory results. In labor-intensive industries like apparel and footwear, U.S. labor costs are high and likely to increase as the American workforce declines for demographic reasons, a trend that mass deportations would accelerate. Hence, if production were to return to the U.S., it would be costly and uncompetitive. Thus, Trump's approach is doomed to fail. Traditional and semi-skilled union jobs will not return, and manufacturing employment, which has fallen from 30% of total employment in 1970 to less than 8% today, will continue its decline. And then it goes into how to fix some of that stuff, and down here at the bottom, equally destructive are the geopolitical consequences. Even though Europeans also view Chinese power as an economic and security concern, Trump is bullying them with tariffs and threats to leave NATO. With the U.S. acting like an adversary, Europeans will adapt their national and economic security objectives accordingly. Following last year's influential Draghi report, which called on the European Union to invest in its own capabilities, member states have quickly changed their spending priorities to favor defense, energy sufficiency, and strategic technological autonomy. This means that European markets for American advanced technologies will shrink. Why buy from Boeing when you can buy from Airbus? Why purchase American military equipment when you can develop your own? Abandoned by the U.S. and beset by economic and geopolitical challenges from China and Russia, the EU may become the champion of common rules, institutions for global trade and investment, given its own market size and commitment to trade. The bloc is likely to find many eager partners who've lost faith in the U.S. An EU-led coalition of the willing could be the foundation for sustaining win-win economic interdependence this century. This may ultimately contain China's power and serve America's long-term interests. And that was the part I thought was very interesting, is that a stronger Europe could solve a lot of problems. rather than having Europe be so dependent on the United States. I think there's going to be a lot of money to lose there, though. The European market is huge. It's the only market in its totality that's bigger than the United States. And, but this idea that a stronger, more economically independent and militarily independent EU will contain China's power and serve America's long-term interests is an interesting thought, and I thought that was quite interesting. This is about the surveillance states of America, and Trump's new surveillance system. We may talk about that next week. The Trump administration found Howard violated civil rights law. That is an interesting story. This is from the Big Beautiful Bill debate, which we kind of discussed at length. We don't need that. The S&P 500. Oh, yes, the stock market, ironically, is up under Trump, which is interesting. It's regained all the lost ground in March, and things are humming along, which I thought was kind of interesting as an anecdote at the end of the hour, which we're at. Oh, this thread is so good, and I want to talk about this, and we're coming up to 8 o'clock. And that's not important. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm tired. I've had a long ass day. I'm going to stop now. I'm going to go get this makeup off my face. I'm going to sit and hang out for a little bit. It's been a long ass day. We'll return to those other stories next week. I'll put them in my notes for next week, and we'll get into some of the stuff. We've had great conversations, though, about trade, capitalism, one big beautiful bill. It's all so good. Thank you for watching. My name is Cameron Cowan. This is the Cameron Journal Newshour. You can catch me on social media at Cameron Cowan on Instagram and Twitter, at Cameron Journal on TikTok, where there are lots of shorts of interviews and this show. Join us on Wednesday at 6 p.m. for the Living Joke podcast with my buddies Will and Connor, and I will see you guys next Monday night. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. We'll talk soon. Have a great 4th of July weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.